Welcome to Haggie Reads for You on Wolf Spirit Radio. Colleen, Haggie, reads children's stories for the wee ones up to the teens. She also reads books for grown-ups. Tune in, kick back, relax, and listen in. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.
Hi, everyone. It's Colleen, and it is Tuesday, January 19th, 2016. And this is Haggie Reads for You. And today I'm going to pick up where I left off last week with Alien Minds by E. Everett Evans. Please tell me, who are the most important people here, and what do you know about them? For nearly an hour he kept the old fellow on this topic, in spite of the innumerable lapses when the man started wondering in his reminiscences. Once, when Hamlet had ventured to ask directly about Yandor, he learned a very interesting fact that he gave considerable thought to when he was back in his own room. This was the fact that the impresario was crazy about animal pets. He has what almost amounts to a menagerie at his home, the old fellow cackled, always on the lookout for new and unusual types and kinds. Why, they say he even has cages outdoors, containing lots of wild animals, even has them brought in from the East Continent and the polar regions. Hanlon remembered now that when he first went to Yandor's house, he had seemed to sense many animal minds near him, but had not taken the time to investigate. Also, that the Roche had shown him quite an unusual number of pets around the house. So after Hanlon had bid the old man good night, the young SS man settled himself in his most comfortable seat to consider this angle, as well as the other things he had learned that night. Actually, while great in quantity, they had been meager in quality, telling him little that he desired to know. The oldster had not known anything about the organized opposition to Estrella's joining the Federation, nor, more particularly, who was behind it. Oh, he could repeat glibly much of the propaganda that was making the rounds, and which Hanlon already knew. How, if Estrella joined the Terran planets, it would lose its own planetary sovereignty and become merely a minor cog in the great scheme of the people led by Terra, who are out to grab the whole galaxy for their own ends of power and greed. That Estrella's people would have to conform to human standards rather than their own, and that their splendid Estrellan culture would soon be entirely lost, that they would end up by being little more than slaves. Why, he cried with genuine dismay and anger at one point, it is those Terrans who are doing all the criminal things that have been making life here so dangerous recently, all those robberies, fires, murders, and so on, that our people would never even dream of doing. Where'd you hear that? Hanlon queried sharply, aghast that his surmise should thus quickly prove correct. Why, everyone knows that. Everyone's talking about it. There was surprise at his question. You mean you didn't know? But it's true. That's the sort Terrans are. They don't even consider us real people, he added indignantly, almost crying in his drink. They actually think we are inferior to them, that we are just semi-intelligent animals. Hey, How stupid can they get? They should know we Australians are the highest form of life in the whole universe. Hanlon knew this vicious propaganda was false, of course. He wanted to tell the oldster about how they actually worked with the primitive but intelligent races of other planets, what he himself had helped plan for the Gudas. But of course he could not. He could have told the old man that while the Corps and the Federation statesmen recognized that the Australians were not as far advanced in some sciences and technologies as were the Terrans and their colonists on other worlds, they did respect these people as possessors of excellent minds and abilities, that they readily acknowledged that the Australians were far ahead of them in ethics and in ways of living together peacefully. He could have added that these statesmen knew and stated that if the Australians wanted to learn the sciences and techniques the Federationists possessed, they could assimilate that knowledge in a very short time. But also that the Federation would never try to force their knowledge or culture on the Australians or any other people. That they never tried to make any of the less educated or less advanced beings of other worlds conform to any mold those people themselves did not desire and specifically request be taught them. But at the moment, this other thought interested Hanlon more than a political review. So Yandor liked pets, did he? Well, how better get in his good graces than give him one never seen on Australia before? Hanlon would get him a brand new animal, one far different from those on this planet, where all the native animals were tailless. Yes, and it would be one with a brain that could give Hanlon a real chance to see and hear what was going on in the man's private life, where Hanlon could not be near him. Let's see now. When's the sneak boat due? Hey, it's tomorrow night. That's great. I'll be there to meet it. Chapter 6. It was nearing dawn on the eastern continent of Australia, and high above in the stratosphere, in its spaceship, the strange being that had been studying this planet so carefully suddenly stiffened to closer attention. Its mind had just contacted a group of beings below, whose minds were of a far different texture, finer somehow, than those of the natives of this world. The language was different, too, which did not make so much difference. But the thought processes of these newcomers, in many cases, were almost incomprehensible to the alien. What are they? Was there more than one race here on this planet, after all? The being activated its multi-phase scanners and studied and pondered. SSM George Hanlon was waiting in the shadows of the great forest enclosing the hidden clearing when the spacer came in. When it landed, the lock door opened. Hanlon ran over and, after giving the correct password, was helped inside the ship. "Hi, fellows," he greeted the two Secret Servicemen who were assigned as crew of this ship, and went with them into the control room. "How's everything in the great big universe outside of this dump?" "Not bad," they grinned. "Nothing special going on. Mars just won the Interplanet Baseball Championship, and there's a new singer on stereo that's a doll. Boy, a doll. We saw Hoop and Manny at our stop on the other side, and they said the Admiral was coming. We got some letters for him, but you'd better take him in case he doesn't show before we have to leave." "Okay, will do. Hey, You fellas got any candy bars? Can't get sweets here, and I'm sugar-starved. Sure, plenty. And while one of the men went to the storeroom, the other asked Hanlon if he'd like a cup of coffee. Gee, I sure would. That's another thing these folks don't have. That herb tea of theirs. Ugh! The first returned with a dozen candy bars that Hanlon stuffed in his pocket and continued drinking his coffee. Oh, yes. Better give me some Australian money. I've had to spend quite a bit recently. About 500 credits worth should be enough. They give him that from a supply in a drawer. Now, for the most important thing, Hanlon said, next trip, I want you to bring me a cat. A nice black... A cat? It was a duet, a surprise. Yeah, a nice, tame, housebroken earth cat, all black. Or maybe with a white star in its forehead. About a year old and quite large. Be sure it has nice, sleek fur. Can do. All right. Doubtfully. But for John's sake, why? One of the men I'm working on here loves pets and collects all the different kinds he can get. So I want to give him something he doesn't have. All the animals here are tailless. So give me one with a really nice, long, well-furred tail. A thoroughbred, not an alley cat. I figure it'll help me get in good with him. Right. One of them made a note. Anything else? Not a thing. Thanks. Especially for the coffee and candy. Wonder when the Admiral will be here. He hoped they'd not notice that near slip, for it had been decided the relationship should not be generally told. And so far, only a few SS men and high officials knew of it. Haven't the faintest. Then I guess I'll stick around a while and see if you don't mind. Glad to have you aboard, mister. We have to stay here for several hours anyway, and we like the company. Getting sick of old Tom's ugly face anyway, one of them quipped. Yeah, I suppose you think you're a beauty queen. You play poker? Lead me to it. Though Hanlon carefully avoided using his special mental abilities, when Admiral Newton came aboard an hour or so later, the young corpsman was a few credits ahead. The cards had just fallen right for him. After the two Secret Servicemen had left the cruiser and it had blasted off, they started back toward town. Hanlon had very much wanted to see his father, for he had been vaguely disturbed and dissatisfied with his rate of progress. True, he was making a good start at getting where he wanted to go, but it seemed to him he was taking far too much time for what little he had accomplished. He said as much to his father. Well, I don't know, the Admiral said thoughtfully, as they rode along the flower-tree-shaded but dusty road. These things take time, and it seems to me you haven't done so badly considering the short time you've been here. Thanks for being generous, but I seem to be taking so long for next to nothing. What do you plan to do now? Newton asked, and Hanlon explained more in detail what he was after. What makes you so sure this fellow Yandor leads to higher-ups? The Admiral asked slowly at last. All the clues I've managed to pick up so far to point to him as a key figure, Hanlon said earnestly. I've read in a number of Minds facts, or snatches, that point to him as one of the leaders, despite his reputable position as the leading theatrical entrepreneur. Or because of it, his father interjected. Yes, perhaps because of it. When Aldrin introduced us and I hinted at my knowledge of his other activities, and when I've mentioned them since, Yander didn't react as I'm sure he would if he wasn't engaged in something off-color. It all sounds reasonable. And as far as the time it is taking you is concerned, you needn't worry yet. It always takes time to open up a line of investigation. You took 3 months or more off to go to Algon, remember? But you got the answers, finally. They had arrived at the house where Hanlon lives, so they parked their trikes in the backyard and went up to his room. Yes, what you say is true. Hanlon seemed more relieved now. What have you and the others found out? His father's short laugh was not a pleased one. Hardly a thing worth mentioning. We don't even have any leads that may be successful as you have. Manning's been working as a clerk in a government office, but can't find a thing. Hooper is in Lumina, the secondary capital, where the study and suggestion body holds forth. Hanlon's mind remembered from the reels that this body was not exactly a legislature or Congress, since it had no power to make laws. It studied all questions and problems that came up, and reported or made suggestions to the ruler, who had the final say. It was something fairly recent, introduced by Elmas Amir, and managed to get a job on an Australian equivalent of a newspaper there. But he hasn't found a thing either, except that he's been in a position to learn where the propaganda's the strongest, and is keeping charts and graphs, with dates and percentages of its spread. But so far they haven't shown anything conclusive, except that the rumors are spreading rapidly, and that lately they have included the whispers that Terrans are back of the crime wave. Yeah, I've heard that. Obviously a whisper campaign started by the real conspirators. But what are you doing, Dad? Mostly I'm just traveling here and there, keeping as quiet and undercover as possible, trying to find out what people all over the planet are really thinking. The percentage who believe the propaganda seems very small, but is growing. About the only thing I've found out at all curious or extraordinary is that Adwald Irad, the second in line, seems to have a much greater than ordinary place in the council and affections of Emir, the ruler. Hanlon laughed. That second-in-line business is screwy, isn't it? The Admiral sat back in his chair, lighted a cigarro, and grew thoughtful. Yes, from our standpoint it is most peculiar, and one of the things that make it so hard for us to understand the Australians at all well. How it's done I haven't been able to find out, but the men of the ruling class are especially bred. Reminds me of the way the queen bees are developed. They are larger physically, less hairy, and far more brainy than the average males here. However, it seems to sap their strength to handle the job. For while the new ruler takes over at the age of 30 at the end of the 15-year term of office, he's an old man. Yet the average Australian life expectancy is 90. He shook his head. Sure is alien, all right. The younger SS man furrowed his brow in concentration. Never heard of anything like it before. He was silent a moment, then he looked up. But what about Irad that's different? I should think the rulers would want their successors to learn as much as possible about the job before they took it over. I gather they do, but usually in a perfunctory sort of way. However, ever since he come back to Australia, Irad was one of the natives who went on that personally conducted tour of the Federation. He has been the ruler almost every day. It is said the old man treats him more like a son than a successor. They seem, from reports, to be closer than even Emir and his own son. Aren't the two related? Not that closely. I believe Irad is a sort of second cousin's son. There's an examination among each generation of ruler possibilities, and the high man is designated second in line and so on down. What do you suppose it all means? Have no data yet. It could be something, or nothing. I'll keep Irad in mind, then, and watch for a place to fit him in. Oh, by the way, how long before he takes over? About 2 years, I think. Why? Just thought that might be important. I'll hunt around and find out. Hanlon paused a moment, and then continued slowly. But the more you tell me of what you and the boys have not found out, the more certain I am that my way is best, for me, at least, and that I can get some dope through the gangs here. I'm willing to buy that now. I'll grant that whoever is back of all this opposition may be, and probably is, using the criminals. And you may get the first leads at that. In fact, you already have more than we have. But I think we'll find, if we ever learn, that someone far above their level is the prime operator. You think there's a possibility it might be some alien, like Bohr was on Simonides? His father sat upright and looked at him penetratingly. I hadn't thought of that. Then he slumped down again. But I wouldn't say so. It would really be stretching coincidence way out of shape for it to be the same sort of setup that you found there. You haven't found anything to make you think that, have you? No, I don't really suspect anything of the sort. Just can't forget how surprised we were back there when we found out about Bohr. Well, we'll just have to keep on plugging. The campaign is so obvious, so open with all its use of pamphlets, spreaders of rumor, and the same arguments everywhere. It seems we certainly ought to find some lead somewhere, but— he shrugged helplessly. There's certainly a clever propagandist in the background somewhere, and he sure keeps well hidden. The elder made a pained grimace. You can say that again. Say, I've got an idea. How about having Hooper or Manning, or bring in still another SS man, to come here and let me brief him on what I've found out about 2 or 3 other natives who seem to be up in the gang world. I've got leads on some others who are apparently lesser gang bosses, but I haven't time to follow them up and keep on with my other lines of investigation, even though I think they're important enough to study. Having someone else here to work on them would get rid of a lot of the criminal activity, I'm sure, and would leave me more free to work on Yandor and his superiors. This Yandor is fond of pets, and the sneak boat's bringing me a cat next trip, and through its mind and eyes and ears I can watch him when he's at home and so on. His father stared at him in surprise. A cat? Then he shook his head with a helpless movement, but grinned feebly. You continually amaze me, Spence. I hope it works out. Oh, I'm sure it will. Yandor makes a hobby of animals, and anything as strange and wonderful to Australians as a tailed cat he'll undoubtedly keep with him most of the time, especially after I impress on Tabby's mind that it is to love Yandor wholeheartedly and be very distressed when away from him. He grinned wolfishly. Sounds good if you can work it, and I'm sure you can. As to the other— he thought in silence for several minutes, and then— I'll have Manning come here and go to work with you. Being a government clerk, he could pretend he wants to get into local politics, and it'll all seem natural to the natives. Fine. One of the locals I suspect is a sort of political boss. I'll brief Maury on all I know, and suggest some things he can look into to start with. And Hooper and I'll check more closely into the gangs over on the eastern continent, the Admiral said. Then he leaned forward earnestly. We've got to solve this. At first it was merely asking a new world with a high civilization to join us for mutual benefits. But now that this opposition has grown so strong, if we fail here, we'll have that much more trouble with other non-Terran worlds we discover. You know Colonial has dozens of survey ships out all the time, and since they cracked that new type drive of Bohr's and increased our speed nearly 300%, these exploring trips go both farther and faster. We'll get 'em, Dad, and Hanlon got up as his father rose. Admiral Newton was still not too optimistic. I certainly hope so. Well, keep trying, son. And don't get into any more trouble than necessary. I won't, Dad. Safe flights. And the Admiral left. After his father had gone, Hanlon sat thinking seriously and trying to make plans. The roaches, which he had kept asleep while he and his father were talking, he awakened and fed and then romped with them for a time. But Hanlon was not really in the mood for play, even though he had come to feel a great affection for these fine animals, and they for him. He had too much on his mind for such recreation just now. One thing he suddenly realized. The roaches had brought it to his mind. He'd been forgetting. That was the series of burnings and wreckings that Alden and his men were continuing nightly. Despite his notes to the local peacekeepers, Hanlon knew they had done nothing to stop these depredations, and it made him angry. What sort of dopes are these piecers anyway? He growled to himself. Are they in on all this too? They must be. And yet, I must remember they've never run up against anything like this before and probably haven't sense enough to figure out what to do. So it's time I did something about it. But how? Should I try the same thing or something else? He slept most of the day, making up for his wakefulness the previous night. When he awoke, he considered his problem. Due to the fact that he would probably be working his roaches in public in a few days, and in a way he believed Australians had never seen them drilled or trained before, he was afraid that if he sent another note by means of a roche, as he had done before, someone in authority might be clever enough to put 2 and 2 together and not get 5. So he decided to use an ordinary messenger. After dinner, Hanlon went again to the little cafe that Alden and his men patronized, but this time he did not go in. Having been in touch with Alden's mind so many times, he now knew its texture and individual characteristics well. So when the mobster and his men went into the cafe, Hanlon not only knew it, but had no trouble hearing Alden give his crew their assignments for the night's dirty work. He had again prepared a note for the peacekeepers, and now he added the new addresses to it. Then he went down the street until he found an Australian boy, to whom he gave the note, directions, and a coin. The boy ran to the peace station and gave the paper to the official there. "We're giving you one last chance to serve the taxpayers and citizens who support you," the note said. "You paid no attention to the previous warnings, but we are giving you the benefit of the doubt. We believe you simply did not know how to handle the situation. It is simple. Send a number of men to each of the places listed below, and have them hide and watch. Then, when they see the criminals come to start the nefarious work, have them run out and arrest the men, and bring them back to the station. There, they can be held for trial, by the ruler or someone he appoints. Now get busy, or else." "Where did you get this?" the official asked the boy after reading the note. "Some man gave it to me on the street, and gave me a silver penny to bring it to you," the youth answered, then ran out before he could be questioned further. 3 of the gangsters were arrested that night, but somehow, either through his own shrewdness or through someone's blundering, Alden escaped. In the spaceship, the strange being knew a feeling of profound disquiet. It had followed the 2 of those strange minds that flew the space cruiser to its second landing place on this world. It had known when these beings met one and then another additional one of these unknowns, who were not like the natives of this world. From the fact that the first 2 came in a spaceship, which these natives did not possess, the deduction was simple, that they were all from some other and unknown to it planetary system. But one of the newest minds could not be touched at all. The scanning intellect knew only that such a mentality was there, because the first 2, and later a third, were so evidently holding a long conversation with someone, and in its multi-phase scanner the being could see that that someone was apparently an Australian native. Why, then, could not its mind be touched? In its scanner the two were followed as they returned to the city and to a dwelling place, and one side of their conversation was listened to. They were clearly, the mind was forced to conclude, a menace to its carefully laid plans. But why could that one mind not be read? Chapter 17. In the morning, although still fuming about Alden's escape, Hanlon had put it out of his mind as he prepared for the tryout of his act before Yandor. The new and gaudy uniforms had been delivered, and the Roches had grown used to wearing them. Now Hanlon dressed himself and the animals and left the house. They marched down the street toward the downtown section, where Yandor's office was located. Naturally, the procession attracted considerable attention, for Hanlon made the Roches follow him sometimes in single file, then close up to double file. They always kept evenly spaced, all in perfectly cadenced step. He himself strutted in a sort of drum major's fashion, for he considered all this excellent advertising. "Wish I had a brass band," he grinned to himself. "Then these folks would really wake up." By the time he reached the more densely peopled business section, a large crowd was watching him and his unusually trained and dressed dogs, and comments were lively and pleasantly surprised. As on Terra, or any other planet, for that matter, this parade attracted an ever-growing crowd of excited children, who tagged along with laughter and shouts of joy. Into Yandor's office Hanlon and his Roches marched, and at his brisk command they lined up before the startled entrepreneur's table desk in a double rank of 4. "Salute," Hanlon said, and the dogs stood on their hind legs simultaneously and raised their right forepaws to salute. "Well now," Yandor gasped, "what have we here?" But Hanlon, without answering, turned to his Roches. "Attention!" The Roches dropped to all fours and aligned themselves. In rapid order, Hanlon made them do columns right and left turns, left and right by 2s and 4s, right and left obliques, and finally right into company front. Then, "Company halt! Parade rest!" The Roches, who had obeyed every order with precision and unanimity, sank to their haunches and crossed their front feet. The impresario had stood watching with open mouth and bugging eyes during this miracle of training. Now he rushed up and seized both Hanlon's hands. "Well now, that's wonderful! Perfect! I've never seen anything like it. Marvelous! Can they do anything else, too?" "Certainly." And Hanlon explained rapidly the various other things he had trained his Roches, individually and as a group, to do. "Well now, we certainly can use this. The people have never seen anything like it. They'll be enraptured. Let's talk terms." Hanlon faced the Roches, who had not moved. "At rest." They relaxed and lay down, although still keeping their places. Most of them hung out their tongues and panted in the manner of dog-like animals everywhere. Nor did they move from their places during the half-hour or so Hanlon and Yandor were talking business. All during that discussion Hanlon carefully watched the mind of the man before him, paying more attention to any stray and extraneous thoughts than he did to their talk about bookings, which actually did not especially interest him, for he had begun to find that in those side thoughts of the natives during a conversation usually lay his greatest mine of information. Hanlon was becoming more and more certain that this man, Yandor, had much more on his mind besides the entertainment business that was his front. He had not yet able, to get any direct clues as to who Yandor's superior or superiors might be. but he did glean enough to make him certain that there were such higher-ups. Just as they were closing their interview, Hanlon said, "I understand, Nair, that you have quite a collection of rare animals." "Well, now, that's right. I do have quite a number, and I'm always looking for new and unusual ones." "Do you happen to have a Terran cat among them?" "A cat? What is that? I've never heard of such an animal." "Oh, but you must have one of those. They're not only the finest pets anyone could possibly have, but they have long, furry tails." A gleam of interested desire came into Yander's eyes. "I've heard of animals with tails on other planets, but I've never even seen one. Well, now, such a thing would be most wonderful. A magnificent addition to my collection. But how can I get one?" "If you'll permit me the pleasure, Nair, I can get one for you. I know a certain man on the eastern continent who obtained a pair when he was on that trip to the Terran planets. Lately they've had a litter of kittens, as the young ones are called. I'm sure I can buy one, or, well, I'll get you one," he grinned. "Oh, I would so like to have one, though I hesitate to let you take such risks. But from you, my friend, I'll accept it." "Well, yes, I'll gladly accept it from you. When can I have it?" "It may take some days, but have it you shall. I'll bring it as soon as I can. Meanwhile, where and when do you want me to perform first?" "Well, now, let me think. The National Theater would be best, I think. Yes. It is the finest and largest here in the capital, and I'll make a special presentation of your opening. I'll invite all the finest people, including our glorious ruler and his staff. Yes, 3 days should be sufficient to arrange it all, if the ruler is free that evening. Where do you live? I'll send you word." The next 3 days were extremely busy ones for Hanlon, and he had little time for spying on the mind of Yander, save when he saw him briefly. Feeling in a way that he was being derelict in his duty, Hanlon nevertheless decided that to gain the best results later, he would have to concentrate for the time being on getting ready for his debut. So much depended on that being a success. He had attended the so-called theatrical performances, more like variety acts, or what he had read that the old-time vaudeville shows were like, since he had decided to make his bid for contact with Yander by this means. Now he went to the place of performances to study the layout more carefully and minutely. It was nothing like the various types of theaters he had known so well on Terra. For one thing, it was not in a building at all, but merely a specially prepared plot of ground, surrounded by a high stone wall. Naturally, being Australian, it was 5-sided. Inside the wall, the hard-packed and smoothed ground sloped gently downward from all sides toward a level tile floor, foot-high place in the center, that was like the stage. The customers stood during the performance, although Hanlon had never been able to understand why. Sure seems as though it'd be easy and not too expensive to at least give them benches of some sort to sit on, he thought. Near one corner of the stage was the entrance to a flight of stone steps that led downward into the dressing rooms and property storage for the theater. When it was their turn, the actors had come up these steps and so on to the stage to begin their turn, without benefit of curtain. Also, because of the peculiar construction, it was impossible to use backdrops or sets, as Hanlon knew them. The morning Hanlon went to investigate the place, there was no one around, so he was not stopped nor disturbed while he made a complete tour of the underground rooms and stepped off the measurements of the stage. One great lack amused him. "What?" he chuckled. "No popcorn or soft drink dispenser robots?" He had noticed when attending previous performances that they used no type of footlights or other illumination whatsoever, and that it was hard for those in the back of the enclosure to see what was going on down in the center. By judicious inquiry, he found that on the nights when it stormed or was cloudy, or when Estrella's 2 moons were not in the sky, there was no performance. Following his inspection of the theater, Hanlon went to the marketplace again. He hunted out a stall where lamps were sold, and after the usual considerable haggling and dickering, bought 20 of the most powerful of the peculiar carbide lamps at a fairly reasonable price. Then he hunted up a metal worker, and had reflectors made to his order and specifications, and fitted to one side of the lamps. "I'll introduce 'em to something new," he grinned, then was suddenly worried. Were such new customs and innovations taboo on this screwy world? Another thought occurred to him the second day, and he hunted around for some time until he found a place where masks were made. The customer, who specialized in things for actors, did not have what Hanlon wanted, but after it had been described, the merchant said it would not be hard to make, and that it could be delivered the next afternoon. So Hanlon ordered a face mask for himself that would look like the head of a roche. Meantime, he continued working with the animals whenever he had time. He now felt well satisfied with his ability to control them under all circumstances. He felt sure he would have no trouble in putting on a good act, and his only worry was whether or not he could please these strange people, for so much depended upon his making good. If he did, he would be more solidly in the good graces of the impresario Yandor, and that was the main thing he was after right now. The night of Hanlon's first performance finally arrived, and so did a nice large attack of stage fright. There were butterflies in his stomach, and he was by turns wet with sweat and almost petrified. Peeking out from the top of the stairs leading to the dressing rooms, the sight gave Hanlon a prime case of the jitters. For it seemed all the high officials, business and professional men, and the social group of Stiara, with their wives and families, were there. Even the ruler was seated at stage side in a large, ornate throne chair, having been persuaded by Yandor that he would see something most exceptional. Hanlon went slowly down into the cubicle assigned him, and the roaches, and there fought for calmness. And it was a measure of his innate strength of character that he succeeded. The jitters passed, the butterflies went into hibernation, and his nerves calmed down. The first acts were the usual type seen on Estrellan stages: singers, posturers. They did not seem to have any dancers in that sense that Terran actors do, and acrobats. Hanlon had always been interested in these, for almost none of the things they did were like what he was used to seeing or hearing. The music, however, he could not get used to. Estrellan music was based on a 5-tone scale, of course, and was, to his ears, more of a cacophony than Chinese music. Yet the Estrellan singers had clear, beautiful, flute-like voices. The footlights that Hanlon had finally persuaded Yandor to have set in place around the edge of the stage and lighted occasioned great comment at first, but once the performance started and the people found how much better they could see, were acclaimed as a great achievement. "How did you ever happen to think of them?" Yandor had asked when Hanlon first spoke of them and showed the impresario what he had made. Hanlon shrugged. "I always feel cheated because I can't see better when I go to a performance," he said. "When I go to thinking of my act, I knew it wouldn't show up well if people couldn't see clearly exactly what my roaches were doing. So I figured out these lights. Don't you like the idea? Well, now, yes, I like 'em, but I don't know. People are peculiar about change. They may do something about it if they don't approve of 'em. Well, Hanlon made a nonchalant gesture, we can always turn 'em off if they yell. But after the first few moments, when the customers had seen how much better they could watch the posturer who come on first, the value of the footlights was clearly seen, and they gave their wholehearted approval. A new custom was born on Estrella. Hanlon had been below in the cubicle assigned to him and his roaches, so he had not seen nor heard the crowd's reaction to the acts that preceded him. When it came his turn to go on, he was glad to find that his nervousness was gone, and that he was perfectly calm. Yandor stopped him near the head of the stairway leading up from underground, while the native, who was manager and a sort of master or announcer of acts, made a brief speech. Nayers and Nayas, and you, most gracious Nayer. He addressed the throng and the ruler. Tonight you are to see something most unusual in trained animals. I have been connected with performances for many, many years, but never have I seen anything to equal this. I will not attempt to tell you what's coming. You must see and marvel and judge for yourselves. Now, on our program is Gore Anlow and his friends. Hanlon came up the stairway and onto the stage, followed in single line by his 8 roaches. There was a titter of laughter at the first sight of Hanlon in the roche mask and the dogs in their gaudy uniforms, but this soon quieted in amazed surprise at the exhibition that they were witnessing. Across the entire stage place the roaches marched, while Hanlon took his place in the center. He did not utter aloud a single word of command as the 8 roaches marched about the platform and stopped in a circle, facing the audience on all sides. All the dogs equidistant from the others. As one, they rose on their hind legs, and their forepaws bent to their heads in a salute. A moment they held this, then still without a spoken word of command, dropped to all fours, and in rapid succession formed and marched in company, front and lines of 2 and 4, made left and right turns, marched across the stage in oblique lines, did about face and to the rear, and all the complicated maneuvers the ruler's residence guards did on the parade ground. Then they added some things Hanlon had never seen Estrellan guards do, but which were more or less common to Terran drill teams. They did full wheels in lines of 8 and 4, formed wheeling stars and circles. Never once did Hanlon utter a word of command that anyone could hear. Never once did the roaches falter or break that perfectly cadenced step. Never once was one of them out of line. There was never any hesitation, never any breaking of ranks, even when, about halfway through their drill, they changed to quick time, almost double the cadence in which they had first drilled. How could any of that great, stunned audience guess that the trainer was actually controlling each animal mind, that his own mind was divided, and parts of it superimposed on each animal brain, so that it was impossible for them to act counter to his central, yet individual, command? All the audience could see was the most perfect, the most incredibly flawless precision of training they had ever witnessed. Led by the ruler, they began a rhythmic chant of "Yee, yee, yee, yee!" in cadence with the Roche's marching tempo. The chant grew louder by the moment, until it was a deafening roar. At the first sounds, Hanlon almost lost his poise, for he did not know that this was the method of giving highest applause, and that very few acts ever received it at all. He had never heard it when he had attended their performances before. To him, now, it sounded more like they were giving him earthly boos, and he was afraid he might somehow have offended them. He withdrew part of his mind from each of the Roches, even as they were marching across the stage, and sent it out to contact the mind of the ruler and several others. He was pleasantly surprised at what he read there, for it was not dissatisfaction, but combined wonder and delight at what they were seeing. Quickly he again sent full measure of his mind into each of his Roches to continue the drill, nor had anyone noticed any break in their routine during the second or so of his mind-searching. Finally, after a full 5 minutes of this, Hanlon silently commanded each one in unison, "Company, halt! Right dress! Parade! Rest! Salute!" He himself came to a stiff salute. He directed at the ruler. Higher and still louder grew the chanted roar. Even the ruler sprang to his feet, his sounds of approval nearly as loud and unrestrained as the rest. When the noise subsided a bit, Hanlon gave the Roches "at rest," and they relaxed, lay down, and panted, but each still in his place. Hanlon stepped forward, and facing first one way and then the other, said, "Thank you for your kind reception of our poor efforts. Now, with your permission, I would like to show you some of the individual abilities of my little friends." But while he was speaking, 4 of the animals had gone off to the side near the entrance to the stairway. Hanlon had fixed up a specially prepared chair. To the bottoms of each of the legs he had affixed light wooden rods that extended out several inches. Now the 4 Roches each picked up a rod in its teeth, and thus lifted the stool, which they brought out and set before Hanlon. He looked down at them in pretended surprise, then out at his audience and smiled. "My friends are so thoughtful. They must think I'm tired and need a rest. Well, far be it for me to disappoint them." And he sat down, while the Roches went back to their places and lay down. Instantly, there was a loud, angry hissing from the audience. There was no mistaking this. It was censure, not praise. Hanlon was dumbfounded. What had he done wrong? Quickly he scanned a number of minds and found he had broken one of the most sacred taboos. Nobody, but nobody, ever sat in the presence of their beloved ruler without his express invitation. "Oops! Tilted!" Hanlon groaned, quickly rising and shoving the offending stool off the edge of the stage. But the audience was not mollified. If anything, their clamor rose louder. It was the ruler himself who quieted them. He rose and held up his hand in a gesture of silence, smiling forgivingly. "Boy, what a swell egg he is!" Hanlon mentally wiped the sweat from his mind's brow. "I still don't understand these folks. I'll have to watch myself more carefully all the time." He bowed his thanks to the ruler, spreading his hands in a gesture of apology. Then he quickly made the Roches begin their other tricks. He had one do some acrobatics in imitation of the type their native acrobats did. 2 of the others danced together. Another balanced himself and rolled about the stage on a large plastic ball Hanlon had secured. 3 of them did intricate circlings about each other, without getting in each other's way or breaking step at any time. Another stood on its hind legs and sang, in imitation of the singers. Another walked on its front legs. These, being more to the liking of his audience, yet something they had never seen animals do or so well, soon recaptured their interest. After a bit they began again with the yee-yee of applause. By the time Hanlon's turn was over, the people seemed to have forgotten his one blooper, and were solidly with him, and he left the stage and went below with his roches. Their yells were the loudest yet. Eno Yandor was wildly enthusiastic, and those who had seen the first night's performance spread the word. In days, the fame of Hanlon and his roches had spanned the continent, and other cities were clamoring to see his act, while the National Theatre, there in Stiara, was packed nightly with capacity crowds. During those days, Hanlon spent as much of his time as he could wandering about the city, the marketplace, the recreation parks, and sitting in various places where people ate or drank. With his mind, he was hunting not only for whatever points of specific information he might glean, but also to get a more general and better feel of the people and conditions here. He was confirmed in his early beliefs that as a whole these were wonderful people, that they would make excellent citizens of the Federation. They had such a high sense of social justice, such deep feelings of right and wrong, such splendid habits of cooperative living. More even than the Terrans and the colonists, who had come far along the road of brotherliness in the past centuries. These Estrellans had an innate belief in the brotherhood of man. What a great gap there was between the great mass of Estrellans and those few criminals with whom he was working. He remembered one time when he had been talking with his father about the way he worked. "You might want to be mighty careful," Admiral Newton warned. "Being around gangsters and criminals so much, you'll have to watch not to begin thinking like they do." "You never need to worry about that, Dad." Hanlon had been very earnest. "The more I see of 'em, the less I like 'em, and the more I'm sure the common decency of life are best. We must have law, government, and order, and all decent citizens must always live and let live. I could never be contented otherwise." "All righty, I'm going to stop there and take a little break at the end of this chapter, and put on a little music, and I'll see you in just a few minutes with Chapter 8. The night the sneak boat was due to return, Hanlon early sent word to Yandor that he was ill and could not perform that night. The entrepreneur came, boiling over with anger, to Hanlon's rooms. "Well, now," he began, "what's all this about?" "Oh, quiet, please," Hanlon moaned. He had been ready for just some such thing, and was lying in bed, face contorted with pain, and now pressed his hands to his ears as though Yandor's loud voice was more than he could stand. "Can't you see I'm sick? Why must you make so much noise?" The agent was taken aback by this counter-thrust. He calmed a bit, then but asked many questions. Hanlon's partial answers and evident pain finally convinced the impresario that his star performer was indeed too ill to appear. "These attacks come only once or twice a year, and usually only last a day or two," Hanlon assured him in a weak voice. "I'll try my best to be on hand tomorrow." "Very well. I'll expect you then." "Well, now, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about, and now's as good a time as any. I want you to work into your act various things to say against the Terrans, about how such wonderful performances as yours would be impossible if we were to submit to them and accept their so-called invitation to join the Federation. Suggest to the audience that we would all become slaves, and that neither would performers have time to prepare their acts, nor would the others be allowed to come and watch them. Hanlon was slightly prepared for this because he had seen it forming in Yander's mind, but he did not like it any the better. He was just about to make an angry retort when he took himself in hand and continued keeping in the character he had assumed. He groaned a bit louder and twisted more violently on the bed. "Please, Nair, leave me now. I hate for anyone to see me while I'm like this. As for what you've said, we'll talk about it later and see what can be worked out." And reluctantly, it seemed, Yandor finally left. When night at last brought its cloak of darkness, Hanlon put the Roches to sleep and slipped quietly from his room. Down in the back, though, he could not seem to get his tricky acetylene-powered engine to start. He fussed and tinkered for nearly 2 hours before he could finally get it going. "So help me, I'm never going to cuss out a real ground car after this, because it acts up occasionally," he said as he rode out of the yard and down the dusty street. He drove as fast as he could out to the clearing where the sneak boat had already landed. "Sorry to be late, fellows," he said as soon as he had given the password and been allowed aboard. He accepted gratefully the cup of coffee they gave him, and griped for 5 solid minutes about those gosh awful excuses for transportation these so-called natives used. "Here, have a box of candy bars and quit belly aching," one of them said at last. The other held out another gift, a pound can of pulverized instant coffee. "Hey, these are wonderful!" Hanlon's spirit rose as if by magic. "You guys are my friends for life." "Why, Georgie," one of them simpered, "I didn't know you cared." "You'll have to choose between us, though," the other said owlishly. "I'm not going to be a party to bigamy." Then they both laughed. "Look, he's blushing." "Oh, I am not," Hanlon sputtered. "It's just this pink skin dye," he added weakly. "Anyway, here's your cat." The SS men got down to business and fetched the crate containing the beautiful animal. "We happen to remember hearing that these people don't have milk, so we got you one that's accustomed to a meat and vegetable diet." "Gee, thanks for that. I'd completely forgotten that point." Hanlon examined the big black cat, and his mind reached out and quieted its fright at the strange surroundings, and this hairy being who was now handling it. He talked with the men for some further time, told them he had not yet got any sure clues, but was beginning to get an in with some people he felt sure would lead him to some. They told him the other 3 men had reported about the same, although Hooper said the curve was rising steadily on the belief that Terrans were behind the crime wave here. "Yeah, I've heard that bilge, too. It's just another of those things we'll have to stamp out before we can win out here. But we will." "Sure we will," the 2 agreed. "Anything else you need?" "No, can't think of a thing. The cat was the most important for now. It will really get me in more solid with Yandor, the guy I'm working on." "Hope so, Han. Well, cheerio." "Safe flights, you guys, and thanks again." On the ride back he was glad he had a tricycle instead of a 2-wheeled bike, for the crate was heavy and rather awkward with the cat in it, shifting its weight about from time to time. Back in his room once more, Hanlon released the animal, which immediately dived under the bed, where it cowered in fright, having seen and smelled the Roches who were sleeping in various places about the rooms. But again Hanlon reached out and touched its mind, calmed its fear, and soon had it out of hiding and creeping into his arms. It lay there, purring, while he stroked it and impressed on its mind, whose texture he learned while doing this, that it was safe and with friends. After he had done that, he woke the roaches. At first sight of the feline, a couple of them started toward it in curiosity. Swiftly Hanlon took over their minds and halted them where they were. He then brought each of them to the realization that this was a new friend and playmate. That was not too hard, for the roaches had never seen a cat, and only its strangeness had made them curious. He had more trouble with the cat, for the ages-old dislike and fear of dogs was strong within it, but he finally calmed it by implanting the knowledge firmly in its mind that these strange beings were not dogs, actually, and that they meant it no harm, and all were to be friends. Soon he was grinning at his ability, and he saw the 9 animals eating, drinking, and playing together, as though they had been the best of comrades all their lives. "I'm really quite an animal trainer," he chuckled to himself as he watched them. High above, the strange being lay on its padded bench, and frustrated thoughts ran through its mind. It had noticed the 2 different minds who again had come briefly to this planet in their ship of space, talked with the 3 other different ones, and then had one come to the western continent in its night-time. The mind heard them conversing with that other, but unreadable mind again. But still no sort of contact could be made. Why? It wondered again. What sort of mind was it that it could not be touched? Through its multi-phase scanner, the being carefully watched that entity below, which appeared so like an Australian native, but after it had left on that peculiar conveyance, bearing a container with a strange animal, sight of the entity had been lost among the crowds of the city's streets. So now the mind above seethed with questions, to which it could find no logical answers, even though it was beginning to understand the thought concepts of those it could read. Late the next day, for Hanlon had quickly adopted the actor's habit of beginning his day at noon, he fed and watered his animals, then got his own meal and ate it. Then he impressed on the minds of his roaches that they were to behave themselves and not destroy things about the room in their play, and not to make too much noise. "Sure is handy to be able to do this," he smiled. "Boy, what a babysitter I'd make if I could control humans this way." He called the cat to him, snapped on the harness and leash the SS men had brought with it, and took it down to Yandor's office. He had worked carefully on the cat's mind, and knew the characteristics and texture thoroughly. He had practiced seeing through its eyes and hearing through its ears under all conditions, from ordinary daylight to bright carbides, from dusk to the blackness of a closet. He felt certain he could use the animal as planned, under any and all conditions. "This is Ebony," he explained to Yandor as he presented the cat. At the same time he was impressing on the feline's mind that this was to be its new master, that it must obey him, and must allow itself to be the man's constant pet and companion, without hesitation or animosity. "Ebony," Hanlon went on saying to Yandor, "is the Terran word for black, and this is probably why its former owner gave it that name." The impresario took the big, beautiful animal in his arms and exclaimed over and over at its wonderful appearance, its sleek lines, soft fur, and intelligent face. But it was the cat's long, furry tail that it was his greatest delight. He stroked and petted it as though he could not really believe such a thing was true. Hanlon was careful to explain to Yandor how he must stroke with the lay of the fur, and never against it. Well now, I can never thank you enough, my friend, for this marvelous gift, Yander said. I hope it didn't cost you too much. Hanlon made himself cough in an embarrassed manner. Well, it really didn't cost me, he grinned, and left it at that. Nor did Yander, after a knowing look, refer to the matter again. Instead, he said, it shall be the prize of my collection. I shall treasure this above all others. Yander really was in the transports of delight, known only to the collectors who have made an unusual find. Hanlon read from the surface of his mind the thought that this man was a wonderful friend, and probably no menace to our plans at all. I am sure we can trust him, and use him. The latter phase delighted Hanlon, although he was careful not to let his feelings show in his face. This was what he was after. He had only to learn who we was. But he was making progress. He could really begin to learn things. You do not need to keep the harness on Ebony all the time, he explained aloud. Just when you want to go out with him. In your home or office, leave it off, and it's probably not too comfortable, I'm sure. He decided to do a bit of direct suggesting. That you'll grow to love the cat enough so you'll want to keep it with you all the time. It will lie on your desk or in your lap and be the finest sort of companion. Yes, and be the envy of all my friends. Yander swelled with importance. Hanlon explained rapidly about its feeding and drinking habits, and that while it was housebroken, it should be taken outdoors several times a day. When he was sure Yander knew how to care for the animal, Hanlon left the office and went back to his rooms. After the performance that night, Hanlon went quickly home and lay down on the bed. He sent out a portion of his mind to contact that of Ebony, which Yander had taken to his own room and installed in a padded basket, as Hanlon had suggested. Through the cat's eyes he could see the interior of Yander's bedroom, and watched while the latter prepared for bed and finally dropped off to sleep. Then Hanlon withdrew his mind and did the same. He had set up the wake-up of his time-teller for fairly early the next morning. Immediately upon awakening, he sent part of his mind back into that of the cat. All during the day, which he spent mainly lying down or sprawled in an easy chair, when he was not preparing or eating his meals, or attending to the wants of his roaches, he watched Yander at his daily activities. For the impresario, delighted with his new pet, kept the cat with him all the time, even to taking it to the office-like study of his home with him. There, as soon as they were inside, Hanlon made Ebony leap up onto the table desk and curl up on the one corner. He wanted this habit to become a permanent one, and it, too, delighted the Australian. Now the cat was in the best possible place for Hanlon's spying, while Yander was at home. Later in the day, when it was time for the entrepreneur to go to his downtown office, he put into effect another suggestion that Hanlon had made. He put the small, ornate harness Hanlon had given him for the purpose onto the cat, snapped the leash to it, and took Ebony with him. Dozens of Yander's friends stopped him and complimented him, though somewhat jealously, upon his acquisition, which made him prouder than ever. For Ebony created such a sensation that it took Yander nearly an hour longer than usual to get to his office. He had not yet reached there, in fact, when Hanlon was surprised and a little nettled by a knock on his apartment door. Somewhat angrily, he got up off his bed and went and opened it. A native was standing there, grinning. "What'd you want?" Hanlon growled querulously. "Boy, are you in a temper this morning," a voice said in Terran, while the grin grew lopsided. "Maury!" Hanlon yelled, throwing his arms about the other. Then, over his shoulders, he noticed a number of his neighbors peering out their doors, or standing about in the hall, listening, and knew with a sinking feeling that they must have heard the Terran words, and be wondering about them. His mind raced, and then he spoke even more loudly in Australian. "My brother! It is such a surprise to see you here. How did you happen to come from Lura to visit me?" Then he dragged the surprised SS man into his room and shut the door. "What gives? Why is that my brother routine?" Noticed the neighbors gawking and knew they had heard us talking Terran. "But I sure am glad to see you, even if I was so curt at first. Was concentrating on a job and didn't like being interrupted just then." "Oh, sorry. Want me to come back later?" No. It wasn't really that important." Hanlon was silent a short moment while he disengaged the part of his mind that was in Ebony and brought it back into his own. "Come on, take a chair. Go ahead and gab while I get dressed." Manning did as requested, and they talked seriously for some time, each bringing the other up to date on all they knew about their parts of this business and what they were planning. In particular, Hannon told Manning about the local aspects of the work of the criminal elements, and what he suspected, well as what he actually knew and done. "I'm almost certain now," he said, "that the criminals and the folk who are trying to keep Estrella out of the Federation are tied in together, but I haven't any real proof yet. But I think I will have soon with the line of investigation I'm on." "We've about come to the same conclusion," Manning said thoughtfully, "but we haven't any more proof than you have, if as much." Hanlon told him about stopping Audlin's wrecking crew and a few other possible leads he had uncovered to local men who seemed to be in on the activities here, especially one Oval Espor, a local politician. "He's a sort of gang boss or district captain," Hanlon added, "but I think he has quite a lot of fingers in different illegal pies." "I'll get right at it," Manning said. "The Admiral, he sent his regards by the way, said we were to work as closely together as possible, and that you would feed me leads whenever you got 'em, as I will you." "Sure I will. Maybe I'm sticking my neck out, trying for the big fellas and asking you to take care of the smaller fry, but it seems—" "Think nothing of it, little chum." Manning waved his hand airily. "As long as we clean out his hoorah's nest, I don't care how we do it, and I'm willing to work at anything," the Admiral said, and what you've told me clinches it, that I'd be better an aspirant for a spot in the political set-up here. So I'll pretend I heard about Espor and go right to him." For another hour they discussed ways and means, and then Manning rose to go, after telling Hanlon where he was living here in Stiara. "We'll see each other every few days," he said. As soon as Manning was gone, Hanlon threw himself on the bed and again sent part of his mind back into that of the cat, now with Yander in the latter's office. And Hanlon kept it in Ebony's brain all the rest of that day and early evening. But as nothing in which he was particularly interested happened, and he was beginning to wonder if his ideas about Yander were right after all, nothing but legitimate theatrical business had been transacted all day, at least while Hanlon was watching. There had been those 2 hours or more while Manning was at his rooms. During the time Hanlon was on the stage that night, he had to concentrate all his mental faculties on his Roches, and had to withdraw from the cat's brain. But once back in his dressing room, and while going home and after he got there, Hanlon watched carefully the party the impresario gave to a group of friends in his palatial home. Through the cat's eyes, Hanlon carefully studied each one of the guests, and listened avidly to their talk, and at times had to tighten his control of Ebony's mind and muscles to keep it acting friendly toward some of the people. They seemed to rub its fur the wrong way, and did literally on occasions. Also, they had an effluvia that Ebony distinctly did not like. But under Hanlon's compulsion, it continued to act in as friendly a manner as cats usually do, most of the time with customary feline indifference. Chapter 9. The next day Hanlon also spent in the cat's mind. When he was not playing with or attending to his roaches or eating, it happened that he had transferred part of his mind to each of the 8 and was giving them a short workout, when there was a sudden noise at his door, and it was roughly flung open. He had not locked it while at home. 9 parts of his mind saw through 9 pairs of eyes the man who stormed in. 9 pairs of ears heard him snarl, "What's the big idea of having my men arrested?" As quickly as he could, Hanlon started bringing the portions of his mind from the roaches into his own brain. He sat up on the bed and made his face look blank, but inside he was thunderstruck. How had Ran Alden found out that he was behind those arrests? Why, he pretended to stammer. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ran. What arrests? What happened?" The usually fastidious gang boss was now dirty, and his clothes soiled and rumpled. His eyes were red, apparently from sleeplessness, or worry, or both. His voice was still accusing as he answered, "My men were surprised at their work the other night, and I only escaped by luck. Been hiding ever since." "But what's it all about? Why were they arrested? I don't know anything about what you're doing. Yander didn't tell." "It must have been you. Nobody else knew." "And I tell you, I was not told either. So how could I know? I've been too busy getting my act ready and putting it on, and Yandor hasn't even mentioned you to me." Alden stepped close to the side of the bed as Hanlon struggled to get up, and pushed him down again. Now Hanlon could see the mobster was carrying in each hand a large piece of rope, apparently half an inch in diameter and about 2 feet long. The far end of each was tied into a knot, in which pieces of wires had been woven to add weight. "Maybe you didn't have anything to do with the arrests," Alden admitted, "but I still think you did. Anyway, you used me to get in good with Yander, then turned him against me. I don't like that." "Oh, so that was what really touched him off." Hanlon saw that the slim man was spoiling for a fight, and that he was using almost any excuse to try and take it out on the fellow who was making good where he had failed. Hanlon thought, "I don't want to hurt the guy, now that he's down, but I sure don't want to get hurt either." He'd never seen exactly such weapons as Alden was carrying, but he had a good idea the native was adept in their handling. They looked old and well used. Hanlon rolled suddenly across the bed and jumped to his feet on the other side. But Alden ran swiftly around the foot of the bed, and Hanlon was more or less cornered in a narrow space. First one of those strange weapons flicked out, then the other, and Hanlon quickly found out how effective they were. The way Alden snapped and whipped them made them almost impossible to dodge, and Hanlon felt their burnings across his shoulders, although he was able to protect his face from those first quick flicks. Hanlon had to get out of that corner, so the next time both ropes flashed out toward him, he ducked underneath, down and forward, under Alden's arms, and was in the center of the room. The SS man reached out and took over the minds of 2 of his roaches and made them run between Alden's legs. Then, as the ropes with those terrible knots at the ends flashed out, Hanlon grabbed them and yanked. The combination of that pull and the roaches entangled between his legs was enough to upset the gangster, and he stumbled forward. Hanlon quickly swarmed onto him and got a judo hold on Alden the man could not break. Holding him thus, Hanlon took the 2 ropes from his powerless hands and threw them into the far corner. "Now get this and get it straight," Hanlon panted, but as impressively as he could. "I still don't know what this is all about, and I don't like you barging into my room and attacking me like this. Now get out and stay away from me. You try anything like this again, and so help me, I'll kill you. And just so you'll remember," Hanlon put all his pent-up wrath into his fist and threw it at the now deflated Alden's jaw. This, he knew, was the only way, really, to impress a man of that type. He then forced the half-groggy gangster out of his room and loosed him in the hallway, then shut and locked his door. He listened intently, and finally heard the fellow's mumblings and footsteps going down the stairs. From the window, Hanlon watched the thoroughly frightened native scuffle off down the street, looking furtively all about to see that he was not being followed or observed. Hanlon felt satisfied that he would have no further trouble from him. As he went back to bed, Hanlon tried to figure this one out. Evidently, Alden did not really know how Hanlon had caused those arrests, but was merely using that as an excuse to provoke a fight with one whom he hated for making a success at the same time he, Alden, was a failure in hiding. Had Alden reported this to Yandor? Hanlon had not seen the 2 together, either through his own or Ebony's eyes, nor had he found anything of the sort in Yandor's mind. But he would have to try to find out that answer also, among the many others. He sent his mind back to that of the cat, and took up his spying of the theatrical agent. About an hour later, Yandor had a caller, and Hanlon listened in with interest and growing delight. For it was Oval Esbor, the politician. From the talk between the 2, in Yandor's inner closed office, in which Ebony had also gone, Hanlon got further confirmation of his suspicions. He was more sure than ever now that Yandor was the top boss here, in Stiara at least, while Esbor was boss of many other local gangs, including thieves, dope peddlers, and panderers. Hanlon in his room made copious notes. "There," he exclaimed after the 2 men had parted. "That ought to give Maury enough info to hang him. I'll take these notes to him right away." But Manning was not in his room when Hanlon got there, and since his door was padlocked, Hanlon could not get in. He took a chance and slid his notes under the door. All this time, however, Hanlon had been watching Yandor through Ebony's mind. He had just barely got back to his apartment when the impresario had another visitor, a masked man. Hanlon doubted the man had gone through the streets masked, probably had put it on just before entering Yandor's office. "Ha! This should be good." And the young SS man paid even closer attention, even as he was putting his motor trike away and running up to his room. He heard the 2 distant men discussing many matters of policy, closeted in that inner room of Yandor's. Hanlon found that the criminal activities were, as he and the other Secret Servicemen had deduced, planet-wide and under one general control. He knew positively, when this conversation ended, that Yandor was in charge of the activities of this half of the world, the largest continent, and that the masked man was above him in authority. Was this other kingpin of the whole thing? Or was he perhaps what might be termed the executive director of the planetary criminal ring? Whatever he was the man Hanlon must get next to and unmask. The corpsman thrilled. He was gradually but surely climbing that ladder, tediously and maddeningly slow though it seemed sometimes. One thing looks sure, Hanlon thought to himself. Whether or not this bunch is the one that is opposing Estrella's joining the Federation, if we can eliminate them, it will mean curbing if not entirely stopping, this planet-wide crime wave. That'll be worthwhile, even if it's not really our job. He tried to figure some way to get rid of these two men. If he could lop off the head, the body would die, unless it was a hydra with self-regenerating heads. But after an hour or so of further study and thought, it was borne in upon his consciousness that this was not his job at all. He must quit trying to be the big cheese. If he got any leads, the information must be turned over to his father and the Secret Service General Staff, and let them, not him, worry about how to get rid of these men or punish them in whatever way Australian law provided. When Hanlon went to the theater that night, he found Yander there with Ebony on its leash, as he had known he would be from watching the man through the cat's senses. There was another man with the agent, whom Hanlon had been studying, puzzled by the curious blocking in the man's mind. Yander now introduced him as my good friend Egon, and the three chatted together until it was time for Hanlon to go and prepare. Egon complimented him highly on his act, which he said he had seen twice already, and upon the perfect training of his animals. "How in the name of Zappa do you do it?" he said. "It's hard enough to tame roaches, to say nothing of training them as you've done." Hanlon grinned. "Professional secret, Nair." Then he sobered and added, "Actually, it's mainly a matter of hours and days and months of hard work with them, until they know me and like me well enough to do what I tell them, and I know what they're able to do." He broke away then, before they could question him any further. In his dressing room, while he was putting the uniforms on his dogs and himself and donning his Roche mask, he pondered seriously a thing that had struck him a stunning blow. For Ebony's mind and delicate senses seemed to detect a distinct similarity between the tones of Egon's voice and those of the masked man, as well as a sameness of effluvia, even though the two spoke in different keys and timbre of voice. Profoundly stirred, Hanlon studied this seeming fact with intense concentration. How could he make certain? But his call came just then, and he had to let this new matter rest while he devoted his entire mind to the work of controlling his Roches for their act. Later in his room, as he again watched Yandor through the cat's eyes, he saw him in his home with Egon and two other men playing cards, but merely as a group of friends. Nothing whatever was said during the hours about any special activities of a criminal nature. No sedition, no revolution was talked. Neither Tara nor the matter of Estrella's joining the Federation was so much as mentioned. Still, Hanlon was not sure, and he must become so. Perhaps, he reasoned, the other two men were not in any of these activities, and for that reason Yandor and Egon could not discuss those matters in their presence. Or perhaps Egon himself was not part of Yandor's criminal group after all. There must be some way of getting proof, Hanlon thought anxiously. How could he positively connect the two, and make sure whether or not the cat's feelings were correct, that Egon was the masked man? The opportunity came just before the party broke up for the night, many hours later. Egon had picked up the cat and was petting it, as the men were preparing to leave Yandor's house. Not being used to cats, and not knowing the manner in which they like to be petted, rubbing the fur the way it naturally lies down, Egon was ruffling it and rubbing his hands forth and back across Ebony's body. The cat did not like it. It was only Hanlon's firm control that kept it from, "Hey, that's it!" He released control of the cat's actions while still watching through its eyes and ears. Egon's hand again rubbed heavily across the cat's fur. Almost light swift was the slash of a clawed paw, and Egon yelped as he dropped Ebony to clasp his hand to his chin, on which blood began seeping from several deep and painful scratches. Egon aimed a hard kick in its direction, but Ebony dodged safely away and ran under a large piece of furniture. "What happened?" Yandor sprang forward, a cloth in his hand to wipe away the blood from Egon's chin. "Wait a minute, I'll get medicine to put on it." "Get rid of that cursed animal or I'll kill it," Egon blazed. "Well now, you must have hurt it some way," Yandor said, placatingly as he daubed medicine on his friend's chin, stopped the bleeding and relieving the pain. "Ebony is so friendly and quiet. I can't understand it. He never acted that way before." "Well, keep the vicious thing caged after this, then." And Egon stomped out of the house, the other two men silently following. Nor could Hanlon detect anything in Yandor's mind which he invaded as quickly as possible, that this was anything more than the grumbling of a friend who had been accidentally injured. Yet there was a bit of fear of that other man there, and a resolution to keep the cat out of sight when Egon was around. Did Yandor himself know that Egon and the masked man were the same? Or were Hanlon and Ebony wrong? If not, why was Yandor afraid? There were many questions, but no answers, and Hanlon fumed. He must get facts. He was getting a lot of suspicions and possible clues, and certainly more information all the time, but none of them tied in together as yet. None of them were provable facts. Slowly, as he thought this out, it became more and more apparent to Hanlon that he must no longer be tied down to his work at the theater. It, and taking care of the Roches, daytimes, was demanding entirely too much of his time. Besides, it had only been undertaken to give him a chance to get acquainted with Eno yonder, and later to give Hanlon a reason for presenting the cat to this pet collector. So, when he went to the theater that night, Hanlon was, to all intents and purposes, roaring drunk. He was surly and insolent to everyone he met, and his performance was terrible. The Roches did not stay in straight lines. They were out of step often, and fumbled and stumbled in one way or another much of the time. The master of ceremonies finally came out, forced Hanlon off the stage, and then apologized to the stunned audience. "What made you think you could get away with anything like this?" the manager demanded hotly, down in Hanlon's dressing room. "You're through here. The act is canceled, and I'll make sure no other theater hires you." "Well, now, that's right," another angry voice broke in, and Hanlon turned to see Yandor, his face black. "Your entire contract is broken as of now. I'll not tolerate such a disgraceful performance from anyone under me." Hanlon blustered and cursed, and yanked off his costume to get into his street clothes. He apparently was not concerned with the Roches, did not even take off their costumes. But actually he was seeing to it that none of his anger touched their minds or affected them in any way. Back in his room he considered the matter for some time, and decided he had put it across all right, that these touchy men would not connect with him any reverses that might suffer later in their outside criminal work. He considered the problem of his Roches. He had always loved dogs, and having become so intimate with these Australian pooches, he hated to part with them. They were such lovable pets, so gentle and affectionate and loyal. Knowing their minds so intimately, Hanlon knew they often wondered at the way they were being handled, and made to do things beyond their ordinary ability. Yet none of them had ever had the least rebellious thought of ill feeling toward this master who had made them do such unusual things. But Hanlon knew he could no longer take care of them as they deserved, that they would only be in the way from now on. His first act that next morning, after they'd been fed, was to see to it that they were taken out, and good homes found for them. There were many children living in his own and neighboring houses who were glad to receive gifts of such fine pets. That worry solved, Hanlon went back to his room and spent most of the day there, a great deal of it lying down on his bed or sprawled out in his easy chair. His mind in that of Ebony, the cat, or roaming the city watching the minds of the people he knew and suspected. During the afternoon the masked man called on Yander again. Through Ebony's sharp eyes, Hanlon carefully scrutinized and studied the lower part of the visitor's face, which, luckily, the mask did not cover. "Ha!" he explained gleefully, for those scratches were quite plainly visible to one who knew exactly where they were, and who was specifically looking for them, even though it was apparent that there had been a careful attempt to conceal them with cosmetics. Egon and the masked men, then, were one and the same. But who was he, really? That was Hanlon's next important problem. The following night, through the cat's eyes, Hanlon again saw Egon and the other two men coming into Yander's house for one of their usual card games. Now, perhaps, was his chance to find out who the man was and where he lived. Ebony had been banished to the next room, but through its ears Hanlon was listening carefully to know that the four were still in the house. Meanwhile, he dressed and rode his motor tricycle to the vicinity of Yander's home. There he hid himself in a dense shadow, always in possession of Ebony's mind, waiting for signs that the men were getting ready to leave. Unexpectedly, however, as they were going out, a large, ornate, motorized tricycle with double seats drove up to the house. Egon entered it, and was driven rapidly away, far faster than Hanlon's smaller machine could possibly go. The young SS man was caught flat-footed. Or wait, was he? There was a way, after all, for him. Swiftly his mind sought about and quickly found a sleeping bird in a nearby tree. Taking control of its mind, he sent it winging after the speeding car, and by this method was able to follow it as it drove swiftly out into the country. In the spaceship above, a decision was made. By means of the multi-phase scanner, certain entities on the planet below, whose general position was already known, were hunted out, for the alien now definitely concluded that they were highly inimical to its plans. But certain means those beings were captured and taken forcibly to a place that had been prepared. Chapter 10. Immediately after SSM George Hanlon had sent part of his mind into that of the bird and made it follow Egon's car, the young man followed on his own trike, driven at its top speed out along the road the faster machine had taken. He cussed the slowness of this clumsy vehicle, wishing he had a fast Terran jet cycle or car. But he had to make do with what he had, and finally calmed himself with the knowledge that he could see where the other went through the bird's eyes, even if he himself could not close up the distance separating them. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," he scolded himself. "Who else could turn this into success? Be thankful for your great luck in having such a wonderful talent, and quit this eternal griping the minute something goes the tiniest bit haywire." Thus he saw when the other car turned in through the gates leading to the drive before a rather small but excellent cottage. The tricycle stopped at the doorway, and Egon got out and entered the house. The chauffeur drove into a shed behind the house, left the machine, and then himself went into the main house through a back door. Making the bird peer in through the windows, Hanlon was able to see that this house, while small, was richly and comfortably furnished according to Australian standards. By the time he arrived in the vicinity in person, ready to take over the inspection himself, Hanlon had a fairly good idea of the ground floor layout. The upper story was still in darkness, none of the rooms yet lighted. Hanlon's first act was to direct the bird to a comfortable perch in a nearby tree, close to a semi-rotted spot where there were dozens of grubs for its breakfast, and let it go back to sleep. He was always so thankful to his various animal and bird assistants that he was careful to be thoughtful of their ease and well-being. Now, after parking his machine in the shadows of a large flower tree, Hanlon dodged from shadow to shadow, scouting the house and neighborhood carefully. As best as he could judge, the estate must be about 3 acres in extent. There were quite an unusual number of flower beds and a few quite large flower trees that should give him considerable cover if he wanted to get closer, which he did not care to risk at this time. Must be about 7 rooms, he mused as he examined the little house. As was usual with Australian buildings, it was pentagonal in shape and with a green tile roof. Behind it, in addition to the shed where the tricycle was kept, there was another small stone building, but it was dark, and Hanlon could not tell what it was used for. After seeing all he could see from a distance of the outside of Egan's place, Hanlon looked about the neighborhood. It was not too closely built up, but some distance down the street he saw what appeared to be a shopping district. One building was lighted up even at this hour, and he shrewdly guessed it might be a place where men drank. So it proved, and Hanlon entered. While sipping a glass of Michel, he did some discreet investigating, both by talking to the serving girl and by searching the minds of the customers in the cafe. He was almost rocked back on his heels when he found that the house he had scouted was the home of Adwal Irad, the second in line. "Ow!" he yelled mentally. "So Egan and Irad are the same. Where does that put me?" He again investigated the minds of the few men and women there in the drinking place, looking for thoughts about Irad. Then he left, and slowly rode home, thinking seriously. This was really startling news, and yet it was half expected at that. So many clues had pointed that way. So this really meant that Irad was in the back of all the pernicious activities that were going on. But in the name of Snyder, why? That question had him stopped for the present. Oh, he could think of a dozen reasons, yes, but there was no way at the moment of knowing which, if any of them, was correct. Also, it didn't square with Irad's position, nor with what he had learned so far about the man, not even what his neighbors thought of him, as Hanlon had learned there in the cafe. It was distinctly not in character, and was certainly not what one would expect of the heir to the planetary rulership. The next day Hanlon devoted to wandering about the city, hunting for information and thoughts about Adwal Irad. Many times he got into conversation with people of high and low degree, asking questions that forced them to think about the second in line, so he could read the real thoughts about the man in the minds of these selected people. Twice he rode his trike to the house where Manning lived, to tell what he had learned and to discuss it with him, but neither time was his fellow operative at home. Now, the more Hanlon investigated, the more people he talked to and the more minds he studied, the more puzzled he became. Irad just wasn't that kind of man. At least, he had never been associated in the minds of his future subjects with that sort of thing. He was really well liked. In fact, the general attitude was almost that of hero worship. And Hanlon knew that where there is hero worship, there first has to be someone worthy of being thought a hero. Something was screwy somewhere. With what Hanlon was beginning to learn about Irad, brash and self-confident as he was, Hanlon knew this was something that must be brought to the attention of his father and the other SS men here. How could he most quickly contact the Admiral? Manning probably knows exactly where to get in touch with Dad, he thought. He talked with him only a few days ago. But again, Manning was not home, and Hanlon could not banish the thoughts of worry and frustration from his mind as he rode slowly back to his own rooms. He again set the wake-up for his time-teller for an early hour and went to sleep. When the call came, he hurriedly rose, dressed, and breakfasted. Then he went out of his room in the house. Just as he reached the street and turned toward the part of the city where Manning lived, he swiveled about sharply as he heard the splat, splat of running feet coming up behind him. Running, staggering, rather, down the narrow, rutted road was a native, his great feet raising clouds of dust. Something in the fellow's wild manner held Hanlon's attention. As the runner drew nearer, his wildly waving arms, his bloodshot, almost unseeing eyes, told all too plainly that he was badly frightened. Yet, so far as Hanlon could see, nothing or no one was pursuing him. As the native drew closer, Hanlon gave a start. Why, he knew, but it couldn't be. He was on the eastern continent, thousands of miles away. Hanlon's mind must be playing tricks on him, but he scanned the fellow more closely, touching his mind, and at last was sure it was. Disguised as a native humanoid though he was, Hanlon knew this was Kurt Hooper, another of the Secret Servicemen who was working on this planet. Hanlon stepped into the road to intercept the runner. He spoke as the man came abreast, but Hooper paid no attention, seemed not even to see him. More puzzled than ever, the young SS man ran alongside and reached out to grasp the runner's forearm, forcing him to halt. "Hey, Kurt, it's me, Hanlon," he said. "What's the matter?" He was now deeply concerned. "Don't stop me! Gotta run! Gotta get away!" came gasping, tearing words, even as the other tried to loosen himself from Hanlon's grasp. Hanlon probed quickly into the man's mind, but, as usual, he could read only the surface thoughts. These told of some terrible danger threatening, that only running, always running, could possibly save him. What the danger was, who or what was threatening him, was not in those surface thoughts. "Snyder, help me!" Hanlon begged bitterly beneath his breath. Why couldn't he learn how to penetrate deeper into human minds, as he could with animals, and read everything that was there instead of merely whatever thoughts were passing across the surface? But Hooper was fighting as only a madman can fight, and Hanlon was barely able to hold him. Yet he must. He had to learn what this was all about, why Hooper was here in the town of the ruler instead of back where he'd been stationed, what the danger was, and if it threatened the work of the Secret Servicemen and possibly the other Terrans. It was clear that Hooper was either drugged or that his mind had become insane in some manner. Whether permanently or temporarily, Hanlon could not yet figure out. Acting on sudden impulse, Hanlon switched his grasp to a neo-judo hold he'd been taught that made Hooper powerless in his hands. He dragged his companion back inside. Once in his room, Hanlon forced Hooper's unwilling body down on the bed and pressed certain nerve ends that temporarily paralyzed his body. In this way, Hanlon could be more free to study that sick mind, which was not paralyzed, without having to watch every minute lest the deranged man escape. While Hanlon was able only to read the surface thoughts, he had learned from experience that by asking leading questions, he could often make the other think of things he wanted to know, and this method he now put into practice. What he learned now, in spite of all the leading questions he could think of to ask, was pitifully meager. Hooper had been made a prisoner and brought to this continent and confined, but he had escaped. But he did not know, or could not be made to reveal, why he was on the western continent at all, nor how he'd been captured or by whom. Hanlon guessed that the man had been held in a small house somewhere fairly near, since he'd been running away from there a fairly short time, even though it had seemed an eternity to the frightened man. Suddenly, a stray wisp of thought brought Hanlon upright in his chair. Well, looks like I'm going to have to stop there and pick up where I left off for the next time. Thanks for listening. See y'all later. Bye now.